Good morning, everybody. Today we are in the third chapter, the last chapter of this very brief letter to the Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. And in this chapter, Paul's very practical. He describes for us how to deal with church members who are doing wrong things. In this chapter, he calls them unruly or undisciplined, depending on your particular translation. That word occurs, I think it's 3 times in this chapter. It's the same word once in a verb form and then again in an adverb form, but it's the same word, and it's the idea of being disorderly or undisciplined. It's the picture of getting out of rank, out of step, of behavior that deviates from what is expected, from what is right. Think of it like a soldier who maybe disobeys orders, or a soldier who gets out of line when they're marching. So he's talking about church members who do that here. Apparently, there were some who took Paul's first letter about the second coming to mean that Jesus' second coming, it was going to happen in a matter of days or weeks or months or whatever, and therefore they didn't need to work anymore. They were just waiting for Jesus to come back, and they were, I guess you could say, taking advantage of others. They were living off of others. Look at verses 7 and following in chapter 3. He says, "For you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example, because we did not act in an undisciplined," there's that word, unruly, undisciplined, manner among you. "Nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with labor and hardship, we kept working night and day so that we would not be a burden to any of you." Paul says, we came to Thessalonica where there was no church, no believers, and rather than asking those of you who were not believers or who were just got saved to support us, they were bivocational at this point. They worked long hours making money to provide for themselves while they were also preaching the gospel, doing evangelism, and planting this church there in Thessalonica. He said in verse 9, "Not because we do not have the right for this." In other words, we do have the right to expect God's people to financially support us, but here in Thessalonica, because of the nature of the situation, we didn't do that. We didn't choose to exercise our right, but we do have the right. He said, in order to offer ourselves as a model for you so that you would follow our example. Don't be lazy. Verse 10, "For even when we were with you, we used to give you this order. If anyone," here's what we taught you, "if anyone is not willing to work, then he's not to eat either." If he's not willing to work, he's not to eat. It's pretty blunt. Verse 11, "For we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined," there's that word again, undisciplined, out of rank, behavior that doesn't follow expectations, "an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busy bodies." So they weren't working, they were splurging off everyone else. And in this chapter, Paul says, now here's how you deal with those people. Verse 6, "Now we command you, brethren, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from every brother who leads an unruly, undisciplined life." So anybody who's doing wrong, who's in this particular case, not working and splurging off everybody else, keep away from them. Verse 14, "If anyone does not obey our instruction in this letter, take special note of that person and do not associate with him, so that he will be put to shame." And then verse 15, "Yet do not regard him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother." So what does God say they are to do with these lazy people who are not working? They're just living off everybody else. He says, well, one, if they're not willing to work, which means they're able to work. So if they're able to work, but not willing to work, now, there's a difference in somebody who's sick, disabled, or they really can't find a job. But if somebody is able to work, but they're just not willing to, they're lazy, they don't eat. You have no obligation to take care of them. He says, Keep away from them, don't associate with them. But he also said in a very positive way in verse 15, do not regard them as an enemy, but admonish them as a brother. And you love brothers. So how do we put all this together? I mean, these different things he said here, how do we put those together? I think there's a principle. And I think the principle is when church members are doing wrong, now we all sin, but when they're really doing wrong, don't interact with them in a way that says to them, you're okay with what they're doing. Do not interact with them in a way that affirms their behavior, saying, well, that's just Joe. That's just Sally. That makes them think that what they're doing is not that big a deal. Don't interact with them that way. He's not saying totally avoid them and have absolutely nothing to do with them, because you have to be in relationship with them to admonish them. Okay? To admonish them as a brother. But they need to know that what they're doing is out of order. It's not in keeping with the expectations of a believer, and you don't approve it. So whether it's sexual sins, getting drunk, gossip, just an overly critical, negative spirit, selfishness, on we could go. Love them and admonish them. Love them and admonish them, but do not enable them. Do not empower them. And do not act, not a big deal, because it most certainly is a big deal. Or else God wouldn't have talked about it. That's the word for today. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll be back in the book of Psalms tomorrow, Psalm 65. See you then.